Only about 3% of people who watch my videos are subscribed, so please consider subscribing if you enjoy my content. It really helps a lot. Now let's dive into the story. Andrew Cooper was on the verge of the happiest day of his life. The sun shone brightly over Charleston, South Carolina, as he prepared to marry his longtime love, Rebecca Hayes. Their chosen venue was breathtaking, with the Atlantic Ocean serving as the perfect backdrop. The air buzzed with excitement as guests took their seats waiting for the ceremony to begin. Andrew, a 32-year-old successful architect, stood at the altar, feeling a mix of nervousness and joy. This day was meant to mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life, but it would soon become a day he would never forget, for all the wrong reasons. He and Rebecca had met 3 years earlier at a charity event, quickly forming a deep connection rooted in shared dreams and values. Rebecca, a 29-year-old nurse, was caring, intelligent, and adored by everyone who knew her. Friends and family would often say they were a perfect match. Andrew's mother, Susan, was overjoyed to see her son so happy, while Rebecca's father, Tom, was thrilled to walk his daughter down the aisle. Everything seemed picture perfect, but Andrew carried a dark secret from his past, one that was about to catch up to him in a devastating way. Before meeting Rebecca, Andrew had been in a turbulent relationship with a woman named Emily Warren. Emily was beautiful and captivating but had a volatile personality. Their relationship had been intense from the start, with Emily's jealousy and possessiveness leading to frequent heated arguments. In the end, Andrew chose to break it off, but Emily couldn't let go. Convinced they were meant to be together, she remained obsessed with him. As Andrew and Rebecca's wedding day approached, Emily's obsession reached a dangerous peak. She had been keeping a close watch on Andrew's life through social media, and when she saw the wedding announcement, something snapped inside her. Determined to prevent the wedding at all costs, she started making plans. Emily sent Andrew anonymous threats, and even tried to cancel the wedding reservation using a fake name. Yet, Andrew and Rebecca were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just out of sight. On the morning of the wedding, Andrew woke up feeling a mix of excitement and anticipation. He spent the early hours with his best man, James Parker, his closest friend since college. The two shared laughs and reminisced about old times, which helped ease Andrew's nerves. Meanwhile, Rebecca was in the bridal suite with her maid of honor, Claire, and her bridesmaids, all of them bubbling with excitement. Guests began to arrive, filling the venue with an air of joyful expectation. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 p.m., with guests seated in neat rows of white chairs facing the ocean. Andrew stood at the altar, adjusting his tie, while Rebecca's father, Tom, waited near the entrance, ready to escort his daughter down the aisle. A soft, romantic melody played by a string quartet signaled the start of the ceremony. Just as everyone prepared for Rebecca's entrance, a figure appeared in the distance. It was Emily Warren, dressed in a long black coat despite the warm weather. Her face was pale, and her eyes were fixed with a look of anger and resolve. Clutching something inside her coat, she moved with purpose toward the gathering. At first no one noticed her, but as she got closer, a few guests turned, sensing that something was wrong. Inside the bridal suite, Rebecca remained oblivious to the chaos brewing outside. She held her bouquet, beaming and ready for her moment. But outside, the atmosphere took a sharp, dark turn. Emily reached the front row of chairs, her gaze locked on Andrew. The guests, now alarmed and whispering, began to look around in confusion. Andrew, noticing the disturbance, glanced up and froze, stunned to recognize Emily. He hadn't seen her in over a year, and her sudden presence left him speechless. Sent chills down his spine before Andrew could react. Emily pulled out a gun from inside her coat. The crowd gasped in horror as she aimed it directly at Andrew, her voice breaking as she shouted, "If I can't have you, no one will." The moment seemed to stretch into eternity with Andrew, staring into Emily's tear-filled eyes. He tried to step back, raising his hand defensively, but it was too late. A deafening gunshot rang out, echoing over the ocean waves. Andrew collapsed to the ground, blood spreading rapidly across his white shirt. The guests screamed, some running for cover, while others tried to help. Rebecca, hearing the commotion from inside the bridal suite, rushed out in panic, only to see Andrew lying on the ground surrounded by chaos. She screamed his name, dropping her bouquet as she ran toward him. Emily, still holding the gun, stood motionless for a moment as if in shock at what she had done, but before anyone could stop her, devastation with guests sobbing, some trying to provide first aid and others frozen in disbelief. Rebecca reached Andrew, dropping to her knees beside him. "Andrew, please stay with me," she cried, pressing her hands against his wound, trying desperately to stop the bleeding. But Andrew's injuries were too severe. His eyes, filled with pain and confusion, slowly closed as he lost consciousness. Rebecca's cries filled the air, her white dress stained with blood, as she clung to Andrew's lifeless body. The wedding venue, once filled with joy and laughter, was now a scene of tragedy. Police and paramedics arrived, quickly securing the area and tending to the wounded. Emily was pronounced dead at the scene, while Andrew was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Rebecca, in a state of shock, was escorted away by her friends. Her dream wedding turned into a nightmare she would never forget. Back at the hospital, doctors fought to save Andrew's life. He was rushed into surgery, but his injuries were too severe. After hours of attempting to stabilize him, Andrew was pronounced dead. The news shattered Rebecca, who had been waiting anxiously in the hospital waiting room. Her world had crumbled in an instant, and the love of her life was gone forever. News of the shocking incident spread rapidly, making headlines across the country. "Groom shot at altar by obsessed ex," read the headlines, and the story became a topic of national discussion. People were horrified by the senseless violence that had ended a young man's life on what was supposed to be his happiest day in the days that followed. The community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. Andrew's family, devastated by his sudden death, prepared for a funeral instead of celebrating his new marriage. Rebecca was inconsolable, haunted by the memory of Andrew. Final moments. The wedding venue, which had once promised a joyful union, now stood as a haunting reminder of a life cut short by an act of senseless violence. Emily's motives were analyzed and discussed extensively. Friends described her as having a history of unstable behavior. Especially after her breakup with Andrew, she had reportedly refused counseling and had become increasingly erratic in the months leading up to the wedding. The shock of Andrew's murder continued to ripple through the community. In the aftermath of the tragedy, authorities launched a thorough investigation into Emily Warren's actions. Detectives pieced together her motives, tracing the events that led her to commit the unthinkable on Andrew's wedding day. What they discovered was a disturbing pattern of obsession, manipulation, and mental decline that ultimately culminated in a horrific act of violence. Emily had always been known for her striking beauty and intense personality. When she and Andrew were together, their relationship had been marked by passionate highs and turbulent lows. Friends of Andrew described Emily as possessive, often jealous of anyone who showed interest in him. Andrew had tried to end the relationship several times, but Emily would always manage to draw him back, using emotional manipulation to keep him entangled. She would frequently threaten self-harm or cry uncontrollably, leaving Andrew feeling trapped by guilt and sympathy. When Andrew finally ended things for good, Emily became increasingly erratic, according to her close friends. Emily could not accept the idea of Andrew moving on. She began stalking him, showing up at his office unannounced, and even following him to social events. Andrew was aware of her behavior and had tried to handle it delicately, hoping that Emily would eventually let go. He never reported her actions to the police, thinking that she would eventually move on as Andrew's relationship with Rebecca blossomed. Emily's mental state worsened. She was often seen driving by Andrew's house late at night, and on one occasion, she even left a note on his car windshield declaring that she still loved him and believed they were meant to be together. The note was filled with a mix of longing and anger, hinting at the deep-seated obsession that had consumed her. The investigation revealed that Emily had started planning her attack months before the wedding. She had purchased a gun illegally using false identification and had even visited the Andrew Cooper's wedding was supposed to be the most joyous day of his life. But an ominous presence shadowed that happiness. Emily Warren, his ex-girlfriend, had been planning something dreadful in secret. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, she scouted the venue, studying its layout. Driven by obsession, she convinced herself that if she couldn't have Andrew, no one else could either. Wearing a black coat, a stark symbol of her dark intentions, she aimed to blend into the crowd, concealing her malicious plan. Meanwhile, Rebecca Hayes, Andrew's fiancée, was grappling with unimaginable grief. The loss of her beloved had left her traumatized and questioning everything. Guilt consumed her as she wondered if there were signs she had missed them. Adding to her agony was the relentless media coverage. Reporters gathered outside her home, clamoring for statements, while sensational headlines painted graphic pictures of the wedding day horror. Journalists speculated about Emily's mental state, probing into what might have led her to commit such an act. Rebecca found herself unwillingly thrust into the national spotlight. Her private pain turned into a public tragedy. Emily's funeral was a somber and private affair, attended only by close family and a handful of friends. Her parents were shattered by their daughter's actions. In a brief statement to the press, her mother expressed deep sorrow, saying, "We are heartbroken for Andrew's family, and for Rebecca. We never imagined Emily was capable of something like this, and we wish we could have done something to prevent it." Her words reflected regret, disbelief, and sorrow, underscoring the profound loss felt on both sides of this tragedy. Back in Charleston, the community rallied to support Andrew's grieving family. A memorial service at a local church brought together hundreds, including friends, colleagues, and strangers touched by the story. Despite her grief, Rebecca attended the service, dressed in black, standing at the front as heartfelt tributes were made to the man she had loved so dearly. In the aftermath, Rebecca sought therapy to work through her trauma. Her sessions often unearthed painful memories of that fateful day, replaying in her mind like an endless, agonizing film. Nightmares haunted her sleep, each echoing the terrible gunshot that had shattered her life. But Rebecca was determined to find a way to heal, if not for herself, then to honor Andrew's memory. Legally, the case was complex. With Emily deceased, there was no trial, but the investigation remained active. Authorities wanted to understand how she had managed to acquire a weapon and plan the attack without raising suspicion. They interviewed people who had known her in recent months, piecing together a portrait of a psychological decline that led her to such an extreme act. Attention also turned to potential reforms in gun control and mental health resources, aimed at preventing similar tragedies. Driven to make a difference, Rebecca, with Andrew's mother Susan, started a nonprofit in his memory. Named Andrew's Hope, the organization focused on raising awareness about stalking and the dangers of obsessive relationships. Its mission was to provide resources for people facing similar situations, supporting them while advocating for stronger laws to protect against stalking and domestic violence. Rebecca poured her energy into the foundation, finding strength in sharing Andrew's story in hopes of preventing future tragedies. Her public speeches were raw, filled with sorrow and determination. "If we can save even one life, "Then Andrew's death will not be in vain," she often said, her voice a mix of grief and resolve. Meanwhile, Susan struggled to accept the loss of her only son. Her grief was profound, and she visited Andrew's grave regularly, bringing flowers and speaking to him as though he were still there. The pain was overwhelming, but like Rebecca, she found a sense of purpose through the foundation. She became an advocate for stronger anti-stalking laws, speaking at public forums and working with lawmakers to push for change. Rebecca attempted to move forward, though certain wounds proved slow to heal. Once she had dreamed of a future with Andrew. Now, all that remained were memories and the lingering question of what might have been. Her blood-stained wedding dress hung in her closet, a haunting reminder of the day everything changed. She couldn't bear to let it go, though it symbolized her life's most painful moment. At her therapist's encouragement, Rebecca agreed to confront her grief directly, returning to the wedding venue one final time. Accompanied by her maid of honor, Claire, she visited the seaside location on a quiet afternoon. Standing alone in the empty aisle, a flood of emotion swept over her. She closed her eyes, picturing the happy ceremony that could have been, filled with celebration and love. But as reality set in, she understood that while she couldn't alter the past, she still had control over her future. Rebecca placed a bouquet of white lilies on the altar, a quiet tribute to the love she had shared with Andrew, and a promise to carry his memory forward with purpose and strength. As Rebecca stood in silent tribute to Andrew, she made a commitment to keep going, to advocate for change, and to honor Andrew's memory in every possible way. The heartbreaking story of Andrew's tragic death and Rebecca's journey to heal became a testament to resilience in the face of immense loss. It was a narrative woven with love, obsession, and the courage to persevere even in life's darkest moments. For Rebecca, this journey would shape her future, as she turned her grief into a mission for good. In the years after Andrew's death, Rebecca Hayes sought peace, though the pain never entirely faded. She learned to carry it, finding strength in her work with the Andrews Hope Foundation. The foundation's mission struck a chord with many, offering support and resources to victims of stalking and domestic violence nationwide. Rebecca's story became a rallying call for change, and she used her platform to campaign for stricter stalking laws and improved mental health services. Rebecca's public speaking events became more frequent. Standing before audiences, her voice steady but charged with emotion, she would recount the events that led to Andrew's death. "Stalking isn't just about unwanted messages or visits," she'd say. "It's a dangerous obsession that can turn deadly, as it did for Andrew." Her words were powerful, though each speech forced her to relive the trauma of that awful day. Andrew's mother, Susan, was a steadfast figure in the foundation, finding solace in helping others. She dedicated herself to lobbying efforts and outreach programs, creating a close bond with Rebecca as they supported one another in their shared grief. For Susan, this work honored Andrew's memory, while giving her an outlet to channel her pain into something meaningful. A significant breakthrough came 2 years after Andrew's death when South Carolina passed new legislation to strengthen stalking laws and enhance victim protection. Known as Andrew's Law, it required comprehensive reporting of stalking incidents and introduced stricter penalties for repeat offenders. Additionally, the law mandated counseling for offenders to address the root causes of obsessive behavior. For Rebecca and Susan, Andrew's Law was a bittersweet triumph. Real change had been achieved, though it was a reminder of what they had lost. At the signing ceremony, Rebecca spoke through tears, saying, "I wish we didn't have to be here for this reason. But I know Andrew would be proud of what we're doing in his name." Despite the foundation's success, Rebecca's personal life remained challenging. Trusting others became difficult. leaving her feeling vulnerable in social settings, particularly in relationships. Andrew's sudden death haunted her attempts to find new love, as each relationship ended prematurely when she struggled to fully open up. Her therapist encouraged patience, reminding her that healing was not a straightforward path and that it was okay to take her time. Each year, as the anniversary of Andrew's death approached, Rebecca found herself overwhelmed by memories. The date, once filled with excitement for her wedding, was now forever tied to tragedy. On the 5th anniversary, she decided to commemorate it differently. Instead of retreating, Rebecca hosted a charity event in Andrew's honor at the seaside venue where the wedding would have taken place. The fundraiser attracted supporters, survivors, and advocates for change, and as Rebecca stood on stage, she felt a glimmer of hope. Her voice was both sorrowful and resolute as she said, "Today, we remember Andrew not just for the tragedy that ended his life, but for the love and kindness he brought to this world." She urged the crowd to turn pain into purpose, knowing his story could help save others. Susan found comfort in the event too. She shared stories of Andrew's childhood and his dreams, smiling for the first time in years as she remembered the good moments. The fundraiser was a resounding success, raising substantial funds to expand the foundation's reach, marking a turning point for Rebecca. Although the pain of Andrew's loss would never fully fade, she felt a renewed sense of purpose and decided to dedicate herself completely to the foundation's work. She began traveling across the country, speaking at conferences, schools, and community centers, emphasizing the urgent need for a compassionate approach to stalking as a serious issue. At one conference in New York, a man named David Reynolds approached Rebecca. David, a counselor who worked with stalking survivors, had followed Rebecca's work for years, inspired by her dedication. They bonded over shared experiences and a mutual commitment to supporting others. Over the next few months, Rebecca and David grew closer, shifting from professional discussions to personal conversations. Rebecca began to lower her guard, finding it easier to trust David's gentle, understanding nature. For the first time since Andrew's death, Rebecca allowed herself to imagine the possibility of love, though she remained cautious. David respected her boundaries, offering support while giving her the space she needed. As their relationship deepened, Rebecca was met with conflicting emotions. She felt guilty, as if moving forward meant betraying Andrew's memory. But she also felt hope that she could still experience love and happiness. Susan, who had grown fond of David, encouraged Rebecca to embrace the chance for a new beginning, saying, "Andrew,